Okay, so what we started doing is we started working on this little UI, right? And there's a lot of stuff that we can learn through this. It seems like a simple little piece of UI, but you guys are learning quite a bit about how to build UI properly as well, right? Because we're looking at things such as how do you design it so it scales properly on various devices, scales properly on different for different screen sizes and such, right? For example, let's say that I wanted to use a third-party tool. Let me show you a third-party tool that's outside of Android SDK. There's a tool called Droid Draw. It's available at droiddraw.org. It's actually online hosted Java applet, so you can actually just run it inside of a browser. But it looks like that, all right? So this is why XML is so cool, because XML allows you to do things like this. You can just have a tool where you can drag a piece of text, right? And you can take a piece of text. I can say, okay, I want to put my title here, right? I'm going to change this. I'm going to change that text to be something like, you know, status, update status, apply, right? I can make this little bigger or something like that, move it, right? I can then take a piece of editable text, I can drag it, right? I can put it here. I can adjust the size, right? I can grab a button, I can drop a button here, I can adjust the size, right? I can, and there you go, we're pretty much done, right? I mean, you can adjust certain things, like maybe I want to make this slightly bigger, so as opposed to 14 SP, maybe I'm going to make it 30 SP, click apply, bam, there it is, I can make it, reposition it, and so on. So it's a decent UI, right? Now, if you like this UI, once you're done, you can basically click on generate, and this is the XML for it. I can literally copy paste this into my UI, okay, and it's going to work, right? So why didn't I show you this tool right away? Why complicate things with, like, you know, wrap content, fill parent, etc. This tool is great for quick and dirty UI, right? So you're going to get the UI done quickly, but it's not anything production quality. Partially, for one, I'm using absolute layout, meaning that positions of these components, their XY coordinates, their width and height, it's all hard-coded in pixels. So just, for instance, let's simulate what happens if I turn the device like this. Right, so I'm going to change the orientation. Did it scale properly? It didn't, right? Half of the things are off the screen, right? So you can do it this way, but it's not really going to work that well. This is why you know, people who program for iPhone have such an easier life, because they only have one screen to program for. They don't need to worry about things like this, right? But we're building applications for gazillion different devices out there, so we got to build it properly. So this is just a tool that, you know, I just wanted to kind of make you aware that tools like this exist, and I expect there's going to be more and more tools like this, and they're going to eventually get it right, and it's going to be comparable to what Dreamweaver is today, right? So you're going to be able to do reasonable UI in a great tool, and it's still going to produce XML. But the point behind this is XML is a good tool, is a good platform for enabling tools like this to exist in the first place. Any questions on Droid Draw or any of this? No? All right, so back to this. So we are here doing it slightly different because we're hand coding this piece by piece. Remember, keep in mind that ultimately this is XML. Although it doesn't look that pretty, you can go source format to actually make it pretty. But it's a pretty manageable piece of XML code, right? So it's not hard to adjust. So so far we've done a couple of passes. This looks sort of okay, but not quite. For one, I would like this text to be bigger. Or I wanted to change this text, so we did that. We changed this text. I'm also going to make it bigger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply go to a text size, and I'm going to put, for example, 30 SP for scalable font, right? So there's my piece of text. And remember, what we did before lunch is we outsourced the text to a strings XML. That's why we have @string/update status. That the @string points to strings XML file, right? And update status is one of the properties in that file. SP is back. So the question is about SP. SP is basically the this thing. So it's like DP. It's just used for font. So normally it's 1-to-1, but user may want to say I want everything 25% larger, just because I don't see very well. So it's a scalable font. So we're done with this component. This component also has a piece of text, and by default it's some text edit text, which is meaningless. I don't want any text here, so I'm gonna delete it from here, right? I don't have to have any text. However, you can provide something called hint. So that's not a universally important property, but in this case of this, it's useful. Hint is, you know that gray text is, you start typing, it disappears. That's basically what hint is. So unlike text, you don't have to delete it initially, which is annoying. So there's something called a hint here. And again, I could enter some English right here, but that's probably not a good practice. Instead, I'm going to click on ... I'm going to say add a new string, and I'm going to say hint status. So let me zoom in, hint status. And I'm going to say something like, please enter your status, right? So this is the name, this is the value in strings XML, right? And so that now becomes available in strings XML, and I just refer to it, and now I have that grayed out text there. And again, it's @string/hint status, right? And finally, button. I can same thing, just for a repetitiveness point of view, I'm going to delete this. I'm going to do this new string. I may say button update, and I may simply say update. And there's my button. And I'm going to just for sake of you guys seeing it, I'm going to make it a little bigger, so 20 dp. So now this now looks like a pretty decent UI, right? I can click on the run button here, and we should be able to see this in action. Now keep in mind I'm deploying it on a landscape mode as opposed to the portrait, but should work just the same. So let's see, is this starting? Run as Android app. Okay, now it's installing it. This green button basically thought the last thing that I ran was the home screen, so it was trying to run the home application again. Okay, so there's our screen, right? So we have a little, button, a little piece of text. We have a little button. I can type something, and I can click on update. It's a very simple UI. So the question is, does @string always refer to strings XML? It doesn't have to refer to strings XML, but what it does refer to is to resources string. So in other words, I could have multiple files, but they're going to all end up in resources, and they're going to be element called string. So that's what it's referring to. It gets flattened, right? So you could have multiple files like string 1, string 2, string 3. It gets flattened to a whole bunch of resources that all have a property called string. Yeah. So there won't be yes, no namespaces, which is important because as your application grows in complexity, you're going to want to come up with a naming convention that works for you. In other words, very soon, all these pieces of text flat in your app, in a single file, are going to become like a lot of stuff, right? It's going to be dozens and dozens of pieces of text. So if you don't name them consistently, you're going to be sort of losing energy trying to figure out which one is which and so on. So keep that in mind. I usually do the reverse of what it is. So I would say hint status as opposed to status hint, but certain people do it domain based. So some people in our company, they like to do it like, for example, if it's inside of a status activity, it would be status underscore and then and so on. So it's up to you, whatever works for you, but as long as you're consistent, I would say. There isn't a known, well-established naming convention in this case. So that's basically so we've done a very basic UI, right? So we got the UI the way we wanted it. It doesn't really do a lot, but it's there. The next thing that I would like to do to tie things together is I would like to switch over to Java to make this UI do something. So if you recall, what we said earlier is that there are basically two ways to do a UI, right? We start here with the XML. We get it as far as we can to a point where we're happy with it, right? The way it looks. And then we program it. We give it some business logic. So yes, we can keep going with the XML and spicing up the UI, and we can do that later. But I would like to tie it back into Java, constant integration, right? To bring it back in, see how it integrates, how it works, right? So we're gonna switch over to Java, then we're gonna come back later on for some more spicing up to do. So before we move on to Java, I have a question for you. Out of these 4 components that you see on the screen in our application, that's our application, how many of them do we care about programmatically? 2. So we care about the piece of text because we gotta get what this text is, right, that the user enters, and we gotta know when the button is pressed, right? Those are the 2 basic things. So the way that we're gonna do this is we're gonna assign an ID to each component that we care about programmatically, right? And then later on in Java, we're gonna look up that component based on that ID. Okay, so this is how it works. So there's yet another property, and again, it's on my list of properties. So it's ID, right? So it's a unique ID for components that you care about. So let's look. I'm going to click on the big text area, and you may notice that it already has a ID here. There's a property called ID, and ID is already set for it. Eclipse always sets an ID, a default ID, and it's of this format: what it is, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Right? So it's not very meaningful. I usually take it out if I don't care about an ID, so to explicitly not create clutter, right? But if I do care about it, I actually rename it. So something that is gonna, make me understand what it is. So I may say edit underscore status to be, that's my naming convention again. What it is, type first followed by the name. As you could also do status activity underscore edit if that's a different sort of approach. So this is the name of that ID. Now, so that's pretty straightforward. You guys get that. Now let's explain this add plus ID. So far you saw add string, right? And it was pointing to a strings XML or some kind of resource that had that defined. But we don't have a file with IDs. So that's the significance of that plus, right? It's sort of always like this, but just in case you cared, it's sort of because we're not pointing to something that exists, but we're sort of creating something on the fly. So you're just saying let there be an ID, edit status. That's it. Okay, save it. We're done with that one. And similarly, I'm going to do the same thing for buttons. So select button, find that ID that's now button 1. Okay, they recently changed this. Used to be button 01 with a capital B. So I'm going to change this to button update and save it. Okay, so now I have those 2 IDs. The moment you save it, your R gets regenerated and so forth. Yes. So well, you could. So if you don't have an ID, it makes it harder for you to look at. That would be probably illegal type.
So we'll give you.
Well, I'm not sure if it. So yeah. So I do get an error here. Speaking of errors, you guys are Java developers. Java is great when it comes to errors. You can easily pinpoint what happened. You know exactly what happened and where, and it's easy to fix it. We have a stack trace, super informative, right? No issues with Java. However, half of our programming here is XML based, and XML is not so great with errors, right? I'll demonstrate some common errors later on, but some are harder to find than others. Let's say, for example, let me just make that mistake. I made that mistake. Let me, for example, now do clean, because I'm like, I don't understand why my project is not building, so I'm going to say clean my project. Now what happened is not only, see, like now I'm like, okay, why is it not building? I can't, sometimes it's hard to find these XML errors. It doesn't really tell you where it is. This is sort of new, okay? This little window that you guys are seeing here, that's new. That information used to be hidden in a console, right? So it's even harder to find, okay? So, but my point was that what I did is I made a clean, right? So I had an XML error, but the compile process sort of works this way up, right? So it starts with a manifest file, goes through all the resources, then updates the R file, which is here in gen folder, then compiles Java. So since I did a clean, now my R file is gone. And what that means is that all my Java is going to be gone. So in other words, an XML error can lead to gazillion Java errors, right? Because XML, if XML is off, R is not updated, and all your Java that depends on that R is not going to be updated. So be especially mindful of keeping XML tight, right? And Eclipse helps with that. It's more and more so. So that's one point. And second point is keep saving your files. Because if you have things out of whack and you start saving it, then it's going to, everything is basically dependent on each other. So files do depend on each other. So keep that in mind as you develop. Yeah. So this error here, so basically I had an error in XML, which prevents the build script, the build process, to even regenerate R file, which depends on the XML. Right? So this cannot, since there's something illegal here, this is not going to get updated. And that causes errors here. So now my Java doesn't compile because the references to R no longer validate. So it is a Java compile error, but it's because Java R class is missing. And that's a very common one, that R is missing. And R is missing 100% because something is wrong in the resources, most likely in XML. Right? So this one was easy to find, right? Because it says attribute blah 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 doesn't exist. So if I fix that one, so I'm gonna revert this to add plus ID / button update. Fix that problem. Look, that got generated, this got generated, and this now is fine, right? But what if I, for example, had some different thing? Like what if, for example, this icon, I wanted to rename it to refactor rename to icon 1. Okay? So now is a much tougher error to find. Let's find this error. So these are the errors you kind of hate. This is the type of error that you spend an entire day searching for, and you're like, what's going on? So it just tells me your project is not compiling, your project is not building, but there's no Java error, okay? And there's no meaningful like follow the little X to the problem error, right? So once in a while things get out of whack. So that's what we are trained to react to that by doing make clean make. Essentially, that's what you do here. You say clean the current project. Bam, I clean it, and that's when you use and assume that sometimes this may not show up. So now problems are everywhere, right? That's the kind of like blow up problem situation, right? All along, my problem was right here with this name. Icon 1, right? And the reason for that problem was that the only way to find it was in a console, which I keep hiding, but for some of you it may be normally hidden, and you may not be reading this error message, and it's not the most intuitive error message because it's referring to a regular expression. right? But it's saying the file name must only contain az09 underscore and dot. No caps, no hyphens, right? So now this is kind of like, this is now like a weird, why not hyphens? What's wrong with the icon -1 or icon dash, logo or something like that? Why not? Why is that not a valid name? Exactly. So the reason is that because this minus, this dash is gonna become minus in our file. Because remember, everything I put in my resources is being watched by a tool called AAPT that then regenerates my R file. So remember, in our file, that's going to become a variable. So what I was proposing is to have a variable with a name like this. And you see why that's now a problem with Java, because the dash means minus, right? So be mindful of those XML type things because they're hard to find. I believe so. Yes, because I believe you can't start with a number. But so just use lowercase underscores and you're good. So these names here, drawable, layout, values, those are predefined. There's a short list of names, right? So you can't create your own folders in here arbitrarily. There are a couple of them that you can add, like raw for raw data. You can add XML menu, but there's a handful of these, like half a dozen, nothing more, right? By the way, why do I have 3 types of drawables? Why do I have 3 different drawables? Exactly. This is one resource. This is only one, we only have one drawable. We have 3 versions of it. One is for low, so it's low, high, and medium density, and they all have the same content: icon, icon, icon. So depending on which screen you have, it's going to pick a different icon, and they're the same icon except this one is 36 by 36, 24 by 24, 48 by 48, or something like that, right? So different pixel density. So this is based on pixel density, DPI. So high is 240 DPI, which is basically most of the modern phones. Medium is what your Google Nexus Google G1 is, for example, right? That's 160 DPI and so on. Yeah. Those 3 were created for us, but we can create our own. Right? That's what I was talking before lunch. Like you can create alternate resources. For example, if I wanted to create a layout for landscape mode, I could then say, okay, let's create a new XML, new Android XML file, and I'm going to say layout, but in this case, I'm going to apply layout for landscape mode, and that's going to simply add -land to it. So how does it work with? So the question is, what's the fallback? What's the if you don't have the specific, what's the default one? And in this case, we don't have it. There's simply no drawable period folder. There isn't. Yeah. So exactly. So if I had, for example, extra high, I don't know. I'm not sure if low, medium, and high is mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. It could be. I think it is. But if I had the 4th option that wasn't represented, none of these would match, and it would be simply resource not found. Well, it would scale it if it found the resource in the first place to work with. But if there was no match for a resource, it wouldn't find the resource to scale it. But yes, it can scale a resource. As a matter of fact, let me do. We're going to get to that. Let me do that next. We're going to basically add a background, and we're not going to provide 3 kinds of densities for a background. We're just going to do 1. So we're going to get to that. Okay? Sounds good? So let me just finish this Java thing first. So that we tie that up, and then we're going to do that. Spice it up a little bit. So here we are in Java, right? So this should be a fairly simple little Java piece of code, right? As I said, it isn't, we're subclassing activity, overriding on create, calling parent. So far back at square one, the only useful line of code is this line of code, which basically says load up that piece of XML that we just did up here, right? So that's all that happens. Okay. So here's the thing. Once you execute this line of code, you're doing what's called inflate from XML. So we're inflating Java from XML. And this is where Android sort of meets, this is where Java sort of meets XML, right? This is how Android sort of builds the UI, okay? So this line of code is equivalent if we manually took our XML. Remember, this is just XML. We took our XML, let me reformat it, okay, there. Took our XML and converted it to Java. How would that? So if you did this in Swing or AWT, how would you do this? Well, you would say linear layout, my linear layout equals new linear layout, right? Text view, new text view, linear layout dot add text view, right? So essentially, if you were gonna build this in Java, this would end up being a couple of objects, 1, 2, 3, 4 objects, and each object would have a whole bunch of set this, set that, right? So set orientation vertical, set height this, set text that, set text size, blah, 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 right? So essentially, what we are doing is for every element in XML, we're creating a new Java object. And for every attribute in XML, we're setting the property of that Java object. Okay? So there's really not that much magic. So this basically is a one-to-one correlation between this and Java. This becomes Java. So on the fly, this gets converted to Java, then Java runs. Absolutely. Can you do this in Java and forget about XML? Absolutely. You do not need to do XML at all. As a matter of fact, XML is a throwaway, right? I mean, this is just to get us to develop faster. Because didn't you like that pull button, draw button in, draw button there, adjust size, right? Tools are awesome in XML because tools can exist. You can't have tools like that in Java. Can you have a tool like that generates Java code? I've never seen something like that. And creates Java at the end? Okay, so, yeah, okay, so that's... Yeah, so that's another possibility. But the point is that XML lends itself nicer to tools like that, right? It's nicer to create a UI in this sort of graphical WYSIWYG mode, being able to adjust it in here, and then having that be just bam inflated into Java. Okay, make sense? Second point is that ultimately, after this line, all that is now Java. So all those objects actually exist in our memory space, right? So now that we have all those objects in memory space, we just need to find the ones that we care about. So we said we care about two, right? We care about the text and the button. So what I would do is I would define them here. So edit text. So this is my edit status. And button update, right? And then Control-Shift-O to organize imports, right? Bam, to import that. And at this point, I have those two variables. Now I just need to assign them. So that's pretty straightforward. It looks like this. So edit status, right? And you say cast it to it's edit text, right? And then you say find view by ID. R dot, there's R dot ID. See how we're using R, not looking inside of R. Dot, there's my edit status. So that is that ID that we specified as add plus ID, right? That was that ID that here we said add plus ID edit status. That became a reference in R. And now we're using it to find it here by saying r.id.edit status. See how R is the glue to XML, right? So now that's my edit, and the button is the same thing, button update. Update is a button, right? And then control space, find view by ID, r dot, ID dot, and then button update, and bam. So it looks like a lot of text, but Eclipse does a lot of, helps a lot with typing. So even I make some typos. Yeah, button has 2 T's apparently. So that's basically that. So we now found those two widgets or components or views from the memory space and refer to them via variable in Java. Okay. By the way, do you think these two calls are expensive? No, these calls are dirt cheap, right? Because they're just looking up something in like a binary tree, essentially, right? So you have a tiny little graph of like 4 things, and you're looking up 2 things. You know, this is ultra fast, right? The statements look long and nasty, right? But they're very fast. This is the little one that doesn't seem that it does a lot, but it's actually, you know, a hog, right? So keep that in mind. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about optimizing as well. Yeah.
Doesn't the casting cost some?
Yeah, I mean, there's a cost to casting, sure, but it's not. But it's not that big of a deal. One of the most expensive things in Java is object creation, just like anything else, mallocing and stuff. Second big expense is drawing stuff, right? You allocating it on the screen and so on. Yeah.
So do we have multiple resource files like rjava, .java,
Multiple resource files such as?
that activity may refer to?
Can an activity refer to multiple resource files? So yes, it can, but it can only refer to its own resources or system-wide resources. Okay, so it can refer to system-wide resources. Remember, I kind of said, don't worry about this. I'm not gonna worry. I kind of really quickly changed the color scheme here from white and black to black and white, so you guys can see. Remember? And the way I did it is I went here, and I didn't really want you to focus too much on that. But what I did is I used a system-wide resource called style. But and there's a style that's built in. It's called theme.light, right? It's just a theme. You can create your own style, and if we have time, we can create our own styles. But I didn't want to bother creating my own style. System already ships with a bunch of stuff, like you would imagine system ships with a bunch of stuff, right? So what I wanted to do here is I basically said, let's refer to the system resource style. So this is how you would do it from one XML file pointing to the system XML file. Okay, so I guess there's a namespace, but it's only really the only known one that I know of, at least, is the system one. If you wanted to do it from Java, you would do android.r as opposed to your own R. Or you want to see another common typo, a common problem? Let me show you this problem. So let's make another XML mistake. So I don't know, I'm just going to rename this refactor rename values new or something like that. Okay, so we reproduce the same error that we reproduced before. Sorry. Strings new, why is that not not in this case, because it's just, let me do it in the for drawables. So I'm gonna rename this to create an error. I'll do the same error that we had before. We have this problem. So check this out. So you now say, okay, I can't figure out what the problem is, right? Somehow you got to it. You now say project clean to clean the project, right? Now your R is gone. Your R is gone, right? So no more R. But you don't notice that. You look at this and you're like, why am I having all these problems with my Java, right? It was compiling until seconds ago, right? And you're like, okay, you know, you look at the problems and it says, you know, it says the typical cannot be resolved. So what you do when something cannot be resolved, you do Control-Shift-O, right, to organize imports, because it's probably not imported, right? So you hit Control-Shift-O, right? And now it's like problems are still there. You're like, what the heck is going on? Finally, you read the console. You now go and you fix the console. You go, this was the original problem. So you go and you say refactor rename and you fix it. Save that, okay. You fix this. So you, oops, almost fix it. Refactor rename. So you fix that. Now that's great. Your R got created. So you're like, okay, I fixed that. I fixed the cause. Why is this still not compiling? And you're like, okay, I can't figure it out. Everything's fine. So what happened was while you were missing R and you tried to fix this code and Control-Shift-O organize imports is a great tool because it just makes development much easier. How many of you use Eclipse for Java development? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about, right? So, but what happened in this case is it imported Android.R. And you often don't even look at your imports. And now this is going to mess it up because Android.R takes precedence over your own R, which is local to your package, right? So that's another common, and you know, this could be, for example, hidden like this, right? So you don't even see it, right? It's just like, okay, what's wrong with this code, right? So this is one of those reasons why I get gray hair after a while. So keep that in mind as well. Yeah, you can have the uppercase letters. So it's lowercase. So AZ09 dot and underscore. So it says it all in the regular expression, right? So you just got to brush up on those regular expressions. So, but there's the error message. Okay. So far we now have those two elements. Now these elements are at this point as if we created them manually. Like you could have created a button manually, just like you would do in Swing. Button equals new button, right? So I can do now stuff to this button. I can, for example, you know, change its color, change its, you know, I can say button update dot set text, and so on, right? So it's pretty straightforward. It works more or less exactly like AWT and Swing, right? But I'm not going to do that. What I want to do is I want to attach a list. I want to basically handle this. I want to do something when this is pressed, right? So how do we do that? Well, this also works the same way as AWT and Swing. So it's basically you tell the button to call you when it gets clicked on. So it's, again, it's a listener-driven approach, right? So I would basically say button update dot set on click listener, and now it says, okay, who's going to be the listener for this? And you know, yes, we could throw in an anonymous inner class right here. We could also point to a whole new object and so on. But typically, what I would do is I would say this, right? Like, let's make this a listener, right? So now Eclipse says, well, this is not capable of listening. You go and you say, okay, quick fix, right? Let status implement on click listener, right? Bam. So that adds on click listener, right? Now it says complaints here. It says, you know, well, if you're really truly an on-click listener, you got to implement the methods that on-click listener requires you to implement. So just like always, you almost always choose add unimplemented methods. And there's your on-click method. So at this point, we have a placeholder to do something useful with a button, right? Does that make sense? So I'm kind of going fast through this because I'm assuming for 90% of you guys, this is the same old as in Java. You're kind of used to this. You know what interfaces are and listeners and all that stuff, right? Okay. Normally, I lose like C++ developers on this sort of, you know, adding all this stuff. So yeah, I'll get to that. I'll get to on-click as well. I know what you're referring to. Yeah. So that's probably preferred because it's quicker and easier, but there's a reason why I want to show this first. So now we have a placeholder to do some work. So what do we want to do in terms of the work? Well, in the spirit of keeping this whole incomplete and constantly evolving, right? Let's just say we want to just log, like just know that something happened. So one way to do that, Android actually has a pretty nice logging mechanism, right? So there's something called log class, right? And you can then do log dot, and you choose the severity level. So for example, E is for error. For example, D for, well, E for, let me do dot, I'll say D for debug. But you can do D for debug, you can do E for error, W for warning. There's even this one. And it doesn't stand for what you think it stands for. It stands for, you know, it basically means what a terrible failure. I don't make this stuff up, I'm serious. But we're gonna do debug. So I'm gonna put some kind of log message. So sorry, it's a tag comma message. So tag could be something like Yamba, right? And message could be something like on clicked, right? So it's a pretty straightforward thing, right? It's very useful. I really like, you know, I don't know how you guys debug your Java. I don't use the debugger at all. I really like logging because it tells you what's going on. Stack traces are super informative. And the log mechanism actually goes deeper into the C code as well. So it's the same logging mechanism works in C as well. So all stacks of layer system log to the same log file, which is kind of nice. So we have this. So this should now log when something gets clicked on. So that's our app. I'm going to run it just to see how things work. And in the meantime, let's see where this output goes. So the log output goes to something called logcat. Okay, just like before, there are two ways to do things. One is Eclipse, the other one is command line. So let me show you Eclipse first because it's more visually appealing. But if I switch, remember running, I usually use DDMS. Well, I don't, but that's what it's for, usually for running the code, DDMS. And here you have a logcat. For some reason, it's tiny little window at the bottom, so which is useless, so you want to drag it and make it available here. And this is basically the logcat. This is the system log, right? So there's our app, and if I click on update, on click, you can see that there's that in there, right? Make sense? This logcat is pretty cool because you can filter based on you know, verbose, debug, info, warning, error, and so on. So you can kind of see what you want to see. And you can also create filters. So for example, I can say I want to create a filter called Yamba, and I'm gonna filter just based on a log tag Yamba, right? You can also filter based on PID or log level, and bam. Now I have a very high signal to noise ratio. Yeah, for the tags, I believe it's only pure text. Yeah, I don't think you can do any sort of even the dot something or like, because that'd be nice, because you know, I could then fine tune, but not that I know. I don't think there's a way to do that. In production, it goes into system proc folder, I believe.
Does Android manage the size?
Yeah, yeah. Android manages the size and recycles it and so on. Yeah. So we talked about, so this is how it works on a command line. This is all working. It's a very useful tool for debugging. Let me show you on a command line how this works. Yeah.
Is there log.debug, log.error? Is there a difference between those logs?
No, it's the same log file as a matter of fact.
So it's not just for debugging. Even in the production code, you have that going.
Oh yeah, even in the production code. So let me show you on a command line. You would do how to get a logcat. You would use that tool called ADB, Android Device Bridge. And ADB is a tool that has a lot of sub-commands, right? You guys saw ADB install to push an app down the wire to the device. You can use ADB shell to telnet SSH into your box, right? So to connect to the shell of the device. You can use ADB push and pull to push files and pull files back and forth. You can use ADB logcat to read the logcat and so forth. So ADB is sort of like your FTP /telnet /SSH / all these tools combined. It basically provides a connectivity between the device, the phone, and your laptop, right? And it works the same way for a physical device, right? It's not only exclusive to the emulator. So let me show you. This tool is super useful, and you should know it very well. So ADB log cat works like this. Let me see if I have my my physical phone to show you as well. Somewhere. So this is basically ADB logcat now in the in there. So now if I do update, it's all there. Okay. So I tend to prefer running it on command line, having it always on, always running like this. That's my preference because it's much quicker than flip-flopping in Eclipse. I find Eclipse to be somewhat slow with that. Enough to create friction in development. But it's personal. I know most of you are going to choose Eclipse, but that's up to you. Now, useful thing to know on a command line is how to also apply filters. And that's not very obvious, because if you read the documentation, it will tell you to do something like this. ADB log cat, and then say the filter. So Yamba, so you say the tag, colon, what you want to listen for. So for example, D would be debug, or you can say star, I want to listen for everything, right? So this is what it reads in the usage. But if you do this, it still gives you everything. So what's not explained in the documentation is that you also have to tell it what you don't want to hear. So you say star column silent. And now I have my signal to noise ratio, right? So that's kind of like, took me a little while to figure a stupid little thing like that out. So, so that's that. What is this number? This is a PID, process ID. Let me, just for fun, I'm going to connect my physical phone. So the reason why I'm connecting a physical phone, I've been saying, hey, we're agnostic to devices and all that, which we are, but sometimes people don't believe me. So Control C. So if I say DB logcat, whoa, it's not working. Okay, so the reason is now I have multiple devices. And it doesn't matter if you have multiple emulators, multiple physical phones. You can have 5, 6 emulators and phones connected at the same time, which is perfectly fine. ADB devices will tell you what's connected, right? There's my emulator, there's my physical phone, which is just a Samsung phone. So that's the serial number of it, right? So now I can do ADB-S serial number, or I can do ADB-D for device and E for emulator, which is simpler. And I can say logcat. Okay, so now you're seeing the logcat of my physical phone. It's going to be really noisy, right? Because it's multiple apps, stuff going on, and telephony registry, status bar policy. God knows what's going on, right? So the system is constantly like updating in there. But this is a live, real phone, right? So first again. You can also do ADB, another one that I mentioned is shell. Oops, shell. Right? So now I'm connected into the shell of my phone. I can do things like PS. And so these are the processes that are running on my phone. Right? There's my stuff, right? So you can see how each application has its own unique user ID that it gets assigned at install, and it's good for life. Yes? Oh yeah, absolutely. Here. So here, we're 100% agnostic. So here, I'm going to click on run again. And this time around it says, which one do you want to run it on? Look, there are multiple possible targets, right? And I'm going to say, let's run it on my physical emulator, right? So let's do this. So I'm going to say, OK. Right? So now presumably it's I need to unlock it, but let's see. Let me get my console up so we can say Let's see what the problem is. Application requires API version 8, and the phone that I have is still at 2.1, i.e. API 7. So what I can do is I can, because I don't really care. See, this is the reason why you would want to make sure what your minimum SDK is something that you really care about. I don't really care about targeting 8. I can simply go and in my manifest change that number from the minimum SDK version, right, to 7. Okay, and now if I run it, it says, aha. Remember before this was yellow, now it's green, check mark. Click on run. Okay, there it is. Can you see it? No, you can't. So let me show you. Let me show you like this because you can't really see it because it's too small. Well, one of the features that we have here is in the emulator is see how now we have both devices listed here, right? Well, there's my physical device. I can actually grab this the screen buffer. Oh, refresh. Because there was a little warning that they had. Okay, so that's, see, that's my physical phone. It's 59 degrees in San Francisco apparently, and my Bluetooth is on, and yada yada, right? So when you set the minimum SDK number, all it does is it ensures that the app is installable on a target device or not. That's the only check. It doesn't check if you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing on that device. That's up to you as a programmer. So how do you ensure that you're not using code in a version of application which you claim to support, but it may not have that code? So you run it on that old version and see when it crashes. That would be one way to do it. That's probably something you should do anyway to test really on that version. But let me see if I can get on. Well, you can build a target, right? So you just create an emulator for that target. That's easy enough. This is the site you guys want to live in. This is a very important site, developer.android.com. And in reference, so for example, if I'm using some API, right? What's very useful is if I really know that I'm targeting API 7 or API 6 or whatever, I can turn on filtering, okay? So filtering here. So for example, I don't know, let's look at accounts. I don't even know what the accounts is, but let's take a look at it. See how, if I say filter 7, it's gonna gray, well, see how it grays out things that were not even available, right? Make sense? So for example, see how, certain things, DRM was not available, MIDI, audio effects, and so on, was not available. So you can basically use this little filter to specify what is that you want to target, right? See, not this entire class wasn't available and so on. So that's how you would do it in the documentation, but then you would test it on that device, and you can test it on that device, that lower device, by creating the target of that type, yeah. Are there any things that are deprecated and actually removed from previous versions? Not that I know. I mean, there were a couple of things, like for example, Bluetooth was actually available in 0.9, but got yanked by the time 1 came out, right? So that's sort of, but I guess that's okay because it never got released as a 1, right? Android 1. But for the most part, no, it's always backwards compatible. That's why you will notice certain things don't have a meaningful names. Like for example, if you do unit testing, we use something called activity instrumentation test case 1 or 2, right? Because the original name was already taken and the entire thing has been deprecated. So they just attach like version number 2 or something to it. Yeah. Would it be possible to set up Eclipse to be aware of the SDK? I don't know that. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, yeah, I'm not sure if it does. I mean, we do have to set that in here in project build target. So that is where we set it. Yes, but I'm not sure if it warns you actually about that or not. It does. Okay. Okay, cool. There you go. So does log make sense now? How the logging works?
Can you place a breakpoint also this way or no?
Yes. So you have the full-on debugger, right? So I can click on, I can run this in a debug mode, and you can run the debugging through the ADB, right? So yes, it will stop, and you can step through your code and all that. So that works fine. Yes. Not really, no. You can't you don't conditionally compile, no, but you can dynamically do stuff. So each version has, you can ask for the version number that you're dealing with, and then depending on that you can do, if that version do this, else do that kind of thing. Yeah. But it's not conditional compilation. It's one big code base. So. Any other questions on that? So where we're at right now is we basically have a this piece of code. So we're done with this. So we have this piece of code running, right? And it's reporting here that it's got that something is happening. Somebody was a couple of you mentioned the on-click. There's actually a shortcut for, as opposed to doing this whole business of declaring a button, finding a button, setting up the interface for the button, and then providing the implementation for the button. You could actually get away by not declaring the button, not defining the button, and not adding the listener for the button. Okay, not implementing the interface at all. Okay, right, and you can now simply in status activity for the button, there's a property called onClick, right? So there's a property onClick, and you can specify the name of the method that you want to call. So you can provide the binding this way. So I can just say onClick, and this will work just as well, and it's going to make your code much simpler. You just need to have a method with that name that must take a view in. And in this case, this is our button that got clicked, right? So you could do something if you had multiple buttons calling the same method. So this makes it much easier for the button. Much, much easier. But the reason why I showed you the long way first is because this works for onClick. But that's just one of gazillion different listeners that you could possibly have available to you, right? So say for example that I wanted to listen to the text changes. So what if I wanted to have a little counter that tells me how many things I have still available to me to type in here, right? Like a little counter. So if I'm saying hello there, it would basically calculate the length and give me the number of remaining numbers or something like that, right? In that case, that would not work with this strategy. There's no on something for that, right? But there is a listener for that, right? So in that case, that would be a text listener that we can add to it later on. Okay, but we'll get to that. So that's why the other way, the longer way, is universally working. But onClick is a great shortcut just for click button. Yeah. Oh yes, well that's what we did. Oh, you mean set the onClick for the button? Yes, but if I'm doing that, I would need to find that button. So I would need to have my find view by ID, and then on a button I would need to call yes. So as opposed to adding a listener, so I wouldn't be saving a lot of coding. In other words, right? Because I need to still inflate, find the button, refer to the button, and then add it to the button. But yes, you could do that as well. So this is gonna call onClick. This is gonna call onClick in the activity that loaded it. So this only belongs to one activity. Well, in this case, belongs to whatever activity did set content view for it, right? So that's kind of how it works. If I had two buttons, then I could check the button. So so remember how I said integers are overloaded in in Android we use integers to mean too many things. Here's a place where it's kind of handy. So I can switch on button.getID, right? And since the button ID is simply a integer, I can do something like this: r.id.buttonUpdate, do something and break. Right? So it makes it easy. In standard Java, this would be a full-on object. You would say instance of. You would have to do dot equals and like some crazy stuff, right? Yes. Exactly. You can have multiple. Exactly. You can also have, if you use the onClick property, you can have multiple handlers for that, right? But if you're using, this as a listener, then you only have one listener with one onClick, right? So, or you can also have multiple listeners. So there are many ways to go around that. So it comes down to what works the best. But this sort of works pretty well, shorter code. So yeah, cool. So we now have the button, we have this. So if I wanted to find out what the text is in this thing, so I'm gonna actually undo this because it's not important in this particular case. If I want to find out what the text is, I can say string status is going to be basically edit status.getText, right? And it gives you something called editable. So I want to actually do that to string, right? So now I have status, and I can say onClicked with status, right? So that's pretty straightforward. And if I rerun this time I'm going to run it on the emulator. And usually I have this running. Let me disconnect this guy here all the time, right? So there's I say hello from AnDevCon. Okay, update, bam. So there it is, onClicked with hello from AnDevCon, right? So we got the text. Right? I mean, I can keep on clicking and it's going to be the same text. There we go. Right? So we have a UI, we capture the events, and we do something with it. It's whole and complete. Doesn't do much, but it's whole and complete. Right? So far, so good. So let's assume that we do want to post this to Twitter. And again, I'm not sure if this is going to work out because of the various network issues. But let's say I want to actually, I do want to post this to Twitter. So how would I go around that? Well, there's an API. There's a well-published, web services REST API, REST JSON API for Twitter and Facebook and everything under the sun, right? So as opposed to making my own, network connections and marshalling my own URLs and all that stuff, there's a third-party library that does exactly what we want for this purpose. It's actually a library from it's called JTwitter, but it's not .com. It comes from a place called Winterwell and Associates. However, I ran into some problems with this library, so I actually modified. There were a couple of places where they parsed date, what I think incorrectly, so I fixed it. I told them about it. I don't know if it's implemented, but I have my own version of it. So if I wanted to add my own version, let me just show you how it works. So basically, there's an object called Twitter. You log in with username and password. It's actually, password is not supported anymore with Twitter, so you have to use the OAuth. But for simplicity reasons, I use username and password, simple authentication. And then you simply say Twitter set status. Done, right? So create the object, set status. So if I wanted to implement something like this, I would basically find, I have that library somewhere. Let me see. It's right here. This is the jar file. So I'm going to simply take this jar file and I'm going to drop it into my project. bam, right? I'm going to right-click on my project and add it to my build path. I'm assuming you guys know all this because it's standard Java, right? Add jars. I simply add that here. So this is just you guys had this question, what if I had a Java class? This is a Java class. I found it on the internet. It's got nothing to do with Android. Downloaded it, bam, dropped into my project. Gets recompiled into Dalvik, essentially, right? But you don't care about any of that. It just happens behind the scenes. So I can now say things like Twitter is new Twitter, and then username is student, and then password is, I think, password. Okay, oops. Organize imports. Okay, done. And I can now say Twitter.set status. Simple enough, right? So I get the Twitter object, and so this is behind the scenes going to create URL connect, open up a socket, post, read the JSON back, parse the JSON. But that's not our business here. Yeah. No, it doesn't. So does it handle no connectivity issues? No. I like this example because it gets us to those problems. So we have to deal with those problems. This is just purely making our network connection simpler. Yes?
I'd like to rephrase the question I asked earlier. You're using the JTwitter library.
Yeah.
The application we're working on uses numerous Java libraries that we've developed. Enough so that the compilation of those pre-created Java libraries into Dalvik takes 4 to 5 minutes. Is there a way to avoid that? To do it once to Dalvik? You have to do it at every build.
So the question is basically your project is massive, you have a lot of Java stuff, you don't want to have to recompile everything every single time. My understanding is that classes.dx file is sort of like a jar file, so it does consist of smaller pieces, right? So it's, changing just one class should just recompile that one class, not the entire class's file. That's my understanding, but I'm not 100% sure about that.
Isn't there some thing you can set to compile this as a library?
Yeah, you can also. There's also the option to compile something as a library. Yes, and then you can just Yeah. So that should be that should work like that, right? So it should be just repackaging and realigning the package as opposed to recompiling everything from scratch. So, but again, I haven't run into that problem where the application is so massive. So, yeah. Okay, so let's run this. So this is it's gonna crash, but that's what we want. So, well, it's gonna crash for a known reason, but I want to kind of show you that first. So there it is. It's asking me for username and password. I say hello from San Mateo. Click on update. And bam, it crashes. Okay. So a couple of things about this error message. You're gonna get this error message all the time. Okay. This is just a very normal part of development. You do not read this error message. It basically always says the same thing. Read the logcat. Okay. So whenever you see this, don't be like, something broke, right? It just means look at your log file. The answer is there, okay? Honestly, because it's a very common, it just basically means it crashed. And there's nothing useful in this error message. But there's a ton of useful stuff in your logcat, right? So you can basically scroll up, bam, okay, where did it die? Died here. Okay, I'll look for the first reference on my own file. Demo status activity on click line 26. Died because of the unknown host exception API Twitter.com. Okay. So first of all, one thing that I forgot to do is not use Twitter, because I don't want to use Twitter because again they don't even support the simple authentication anymore. So the thing that I forgot to do is say twitter.set API root, and then I'm gonna point to http://yamba marcana.com API. So that overrides the server that we're using. All right, so that was one crash, but that's not the crash that I was looking for. So let me get you the crash that I was looking for. So test 2, bam, crash. Okay, read the logcat. Okay, so illegal state exception, could not execute method, invocation target, JTwitter, unknown host exception. Well, it seems like we're not online. That's the biggest problem here. So I mean, it's a weird error because it appears that it appears that I am online. At least, let me just double check something. So Slack. Okay, so I do have internet connection. Well, because the emulator uses your TCP/IP stack of your own computer, but every once in a while it gets confused and it doesn't have its own. As a matter of fact, see the little X? Is it the little X? Should be a little X. So let me see. Browser. It's a good test. So that's the problem. We don't have internet connection on this device to begin with. So it's a little flimsy with the network, especially if I started it when I didn't have a network. So unfortunately, this is one of those few times where I do have to restart it. I don't like restarting the emulator because it does take time to start it, right? So, but while this is doing it, we're going to talk about something. So hopefully I do have a valid TCP/IP stack on my Mac. When this starts up, hopefully it's going to take that and it's going to work. So and then that piece is going to work. In the meantime, what we can do here is we could actually catch this, we could actually catch this exception. So intelligent, one plus on this would be to catch the exception here so that it's not really crashing, right? And I'm going to do that by saying source surround with try catch block. It knows that it's a Twitter exception. And typically you do not want to do this, right? Because that's gonna use a standard error, and it will work. It will go into logcat. But a cleaner way would be to use log.t, right? And you can actually do a tag, so yamba, right? Message, something like can't connect to server, and you can actually pass in the E. Right, so that's a better way to do it because you're using the application stack. But let me see. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. So we're back online. 3G, that's a good sign. And if I now deploy my app, I'll need the console to see if it's actually going. There it is. So hello again, update. Okay, it doesn't show, it doesn't, let me logcat. Okay, so this time I caught the exception, that's why it didn't crash, right? But we do have an exception, right? All right, in this case, we still have, I don't know, is that still the same old error?
The same behavior here.
You're getting the same behavior, so it doesn't, it's not.
My browser's connecting, but I can't get a HTTP connection through the emulator. Through the emulator, I should say.
Yeah, I'm not sure. the error that I was trying to get all along is that we do not have permission to get, yeah.
Could it be that your editor is catching that internally and throwing out Twitter exception?
What do you mean? Which exceptions getting caught?
If your Twitter library is catching permissions exception.
Oh, no, the Twitter library, so the question is the Twitter library catching the permissions exceptions? It doesn't, Twitter library doesn't know anything about Android. So it wouldn't catch the permissions exceptions. I was trying to crash it here. Normally it would crash with a you do not have permission to get online type of exception, right? So my point with this is how the permission system works in Android. So basically anything that is potentially dangerous, such as getting online, right, using internet, your app must own the permissions to do that. The way it works is you ask the system you ask the user, so the app asks the user for permissions at install time, right? And then the user either grants everything or doesn't. So it's all or nothing at install time. That's it, right? So and then you basically have or don't have the permission to do stuff. So what we need to do is we need to ask for a permission for connecting to internet, and to do that, we typically do that in the manifest file, right? So this is our manifest file. There's actually a box here called permissions. Now, if you click on add, you're going to normally think that we add permissions, but we don't add permission, we actually add user's permission. Right? So we're asking a user for a permission. And then you have this sort of list of permissions that you have to kind of figure out which ones you need. Usually it specifies in the documentation for a specific purpose, but one of the more common ones is permission for internet. Okay? So I'm saying let's ask for that permission, and now we ask for that permission. Now when I run it, it's supposed to ask us, hey, do you grant this app that permission? Since we are running in development mode, you do not get asked at install time, right? So there are certain things when you run using Eclipse and in development mode, you don't get asked for. So testing again, update. Oh, this is kind of good. It's blocking. Notice that this is blocking. Not how long my button is yellow. This is good. Okay. So I don't know what happened. Let's see. Do we have? Ooh, we don't have any problems here, right? So let's take a look at online and verify if this actually worked. So if I go and refresh this page, I think this is me, right? A couple of seconds ago, right? Try again. Testing again. 1, 2, 3. Click on update. Now notice this is a blocking call. We'll talk about that after. But while that is blocked, nothing else is happening on the system. This is the same thread, right? I'm blocking the entire thread, the entire app. In other words, unresponsive UI. In other words, bad. But we'll address that later. So we got to create a problem first, right? So, and actually having a slow connection works in our favor because you can see how it's a problem, right? So refresh here, and there's my testing 1, 2, 3. So it's good. We just needed a permission. It actually didn't fail with the unknown, with the missing permission. It failed with a different error message, but it was related to that. Okay. So we got it. We have a UI. It makes a network call, web services call, posts to Twitter. Yeah. If you ask for permission, it's not granted. The application doesn't get installed. Doesn't get installed. Yes. Right. So can you dynamically choose the set of permissions, or can you dynamically request the permission? So in other words, if 1 of 10 permissions is not granted, you're just going to work around not having that feature, sort of thing, right? Yeah, I don't know actually. Because normally, I believe you can, and the access to that would be the package manager and the application manager. Those are the two things that actually manage how your application is installed and what's seen through it. Manifest file is just for static information, so I believe there may be a way to do that, but I haven't actually done it myself. So. So we have this posted so far. So this is working. Let me just do one minor thing here, because we don't know if this worked or not. So let me just introduce a minor thingy here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say I'm going to have a piece of text here. So let me do it like this. String status is already used. Result. And I'll say result is message posted successfully. Okay. Or here I'm gonna say result is can't connect to server. Failed posting status. Right? So now I have a piece of text. Now I want to communicate back to the user it worked or it didn't work, right? So simple way to do that, there's a UI component that's kind of specific to Android. It's called a toast, right? And it goes like this. It goes toast dot, and you say make text, right? Now it's asking us for something called a context. Context is something that's very important in Android, and we use it everywhere. And it basically refers to the entire application. Remember when I was showing you the graphs, I was referring to the application context, right? And remember when we were talking about these, I said the entire, this is the application context, right? And I said context is readily available because activities and services are instance of context, and providers and receivers have a context, right? So it's readily available. So in most cases, when you're inside of an activity or service, you simply say this. Okay. Now the text is going to be our result, so that's easy. How about duration? What do you guys think the duration is going to be? It's an integer. Exactly what you would think. No, it's not. It's actually, in this case, it's a constant. And it can be one of these two things. Toast dot make long or make short. And right? And even if you do like, I would put like, I was like, oh, this is milliseconds, great, 10,000. No, 20,000, same thing. It always same length. I was like, what's going on here? So it's either make long or make short. Okay. Now here's the thing. This would not work. Because you actually have to remember to do dot show. It's another thing that I always keep forgetting. I'm like, why is this not working? Everything compiles, right? So it's dot show. So let me show you this little thing, and then we're going to do a break after that. But let me just show you again, because this is setting us up for what we're going to do after break, where we're going to fix this, because right now it's highly inefficient. So if I say hello again, click on update, this is blocking, i.e. not responsive, but eventually it's going to do, you know, one or the other. Okay, message posted successfully. That's a toast. That is a toast. Bam, it disappears. I have no idea why it's called a toast.
It's like a toast.
Oh, it's like a toast. Okay, pops up, right? And you know, toast has one interesting property. A service can launch a toast, right? So you actually, remember service doesn't have any UI, but it can do a toast. And that's partially why, I think one of the reasons why you can do that is because it's fairly safe, right? Because it can't stay for too long. Of course, you can launch a gazillion toasts, right? That's a different story. But for the most part, it can't stay too long. So that's the reason for that. Cool. So we now have a working app. Yeah. How does it know where to? By default, it puts the toast there, but you can also put it in other places. There are properties for that. I think doesn't Layer use toast, and they actually put it somewhere in a corner or something. I've seen it in different places, but that's the default location. Okay, so what we're gonna, so this is whole line complete, works, you can download, I mean, you can install it and it would work, right? What we're gonna do after break is we're gonna look at how the threading mechanism of this works. We're going to look a little bit behind the scenes. We're going to measure the performance of this. I'm going to show you a couple of tools, and we're going to learn about something called async task, how to put this on a separate thread, synchronize it back with the UI. So it's a little bit on a threading sort of angle, and we're going to do a little bit more on a UI sort of stuff. So all the things that I think are going to be relatively new to you and sort of important. So far so good? Yeah, okay, good. Okay, so I'll see you in about 15. Yeah. So the question is, do you have to provide all the copies of the strings? No, you don't. So basically it says, oh, I noticed that the user is in French Canada. Let's see if it's available. If it's not, it's going to go to the default. But if I was in France, it wouldn't even use the French Canada. It would just use the default. So in other words, it tries to find the best match. Yeah. All right, so let's do, I know it's noon. I know you guys want to get your lunch before everyone else. So let's do, I think it's 1:30 is when we start again, right? Okay, and then we're going to continue with this. So this is the fun stuff is just starting up, so.